Welcome to the Historical Romance Sampler Podcast, the place for you to find new historical romance books and authors to fan over. I'm award-winning historical romance author Katherine Grant, and each week I'm inviting fellow authors to come on and share a little bit of their work and themselves. They'll read a sample of one of their books, and then I'm going to ask them a bunch of questions. By the end of the episode, you'll have a sense of what they write and who they are. Hopefully, you and I both will have something new to read. So what are we waiting for? Let's get into this week's episode. I am super excited to be joined today by Kelsey Swanson. Kelsey is an Illinois native who fostered her love of reading and writing after a heart condition sidelined her childhood. Her passions continued to develop long after surgery restored her health. She dove headfirst into the romance genre, perhaps a bit earlier than the recommended minimum age, and became rather adept at disguising her reading material. Once exposed to the glittering world of historical romance, she was forever changed. Her love of writing and all things British translated into bachelor's degrees in both English and history, as well as a master's degree in English. When she's not reading or writing, she is usually watching reruns of her favorite shows, streaming just about any true crime show, obsessively collecting architectural designs, crafts, and recipes on Pinterest, or sketching, crocheting, cooking, and spending time with her family. She is a die-hard supporter of the Oxford comma and is glued to the TV whenever the Tour de France is on, and just told me she has 4 chickens. So, Kelsey, I'm super excited to have you.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I know you're reading from your release that's coming out this September.
Yes.
A Most Unsuitable Lover.
Yes, I am.
What can you tell us about the book and the scene that you're going to read?
So this particular book is a spinoff of my Stratford Family series of books. And so this is my 4th novel that's coming out. And we meet the main male character, Ian, Dr. Ian McCollum, in book 2. And he also makes appearances in book 3. So there's some crossover, but I would call this more of a standalone. You don't necessarily have to have read the other books, but I highly recommend it just so you can appreciate his character's development. There was a very powerful outcry for him to have his own book after what happened in book 2. So I wanted him to have his own happy ending. So that's kind of where this picks up. And now he gets to have his happily ever after. Of course, it wouldn't be one of my books without a little bit of drama. And the passage I'm going to be reading is kind of in the middle of the book. It's Ian and his love interest, Juliet, are at a house party together. And this is kind of one of the few times that they're alone. And I think it shows their dynamic and cheekiness and a little bit of spice. So I thought that might be fun. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So this is from Ian's point of view. The night had been growing only better with each ill-advised decision when he'd followed her down the servants' stairs to the kitchens and allowed her to scrounge up supper for him, when, for some reason, he'd asked her to keep him company while he ate, when he'd followed her up to this remote corner of the manor, and now, when they sat alone together in the dim room, the stars winking at them through the tall glass windows, making everything seem more intimate and expansive at the same time. She looked stunning sitting there beside him in half golden candlelight and half mysterious shadow. Her cream-colored lace gown was elegant in its understated finery, highlighting her luminous skin with its hint of golden glow. He noticed when they'd pressed close together in the servants' stairwell that she smelled faintly of roses and warm skin, something uniquely Juliet, delicate and enticing, a scent that made him ache with need, his sex unbearably heavy in his breeches. The entire carriage ride, Ian had been consumed with questioning his sanity. The days since Juliet had stopped by his office had been nothing but spinning in mental circles as he contemplated the veracity of his morals and decisions. And yet, still, he found himself beneath the roof belonging to the very powerful brother of the woman who had taken over both his conscious and unconscious thoughts. It was ill-advised, to say the least, reckless and unconscionable, to be honest. But seated there in the intimate lighting, their legs brushing beneath the table, Ian had never felt anything so right. His appetite having shifted, Ian set aside his silverware and shoved his chair back from the table. He held out his hand to Juliet, his pulse pounding through his body to a deafening degree. Come here, he rasped. Her beautiful eyes bounced from his face to his hand and then back before she placed her fingers in his and stood. All rational thought lost, Ian tugged her into his lap and marveled at how well they fit together. Ian, she breathed, her cheeks catching fire. Where has the brazen lass gone? He murmured and wrapped his arms around her slim frame. She had the most delectable shape. He could tell the curves of her bottom were pure perfection even through the downable layers of clothing between them. A rush of fire filled his abdomen, dripping lower with molten need. She squeaked when he pressed his lips to the pulse in her throat and inhaled deeply. That is, oh, her words died abruptly when he nibbled the lobe of her ear right beneath the earring that had so helpfully come loose earlier and allowed them to find one another. His hands caressed her back, cupped her hip, traced the delectable curve of her waist, ached to test the weight of her breast with his palm or dipped to that warm, forbidden hollow between her legs. Juliet's hands were performing a tentative exploration of their own. Goose flesh prickled every inch of his skin when she flattened her palm against his chest and then slid upward to the edge of his cravat, curling around the back of his neck. Her fingers tangled in the strands at the nape of his neck, holding him close as he tasted the sensitive skin of her jaw. You still want this, he murmured against her skin. Her head tilted back as he nuzzled her throat. His hands tightened around her until their bodies were entirely flush with one another. This, he growled, me. Her breathing hitched and her body stilled. He loosened his grip enough to allow her to lean back a few inches to look into his face. Are you asking me if I've changed my mind? Ian's jaw clenched by way of reply. He didn't want to know the answer, but he had to. It had been the only other thought occupying his mind for the past several days. He knew he would release her immediately if she'd come to her senses and decided to call off whatever harebrained scheme she'd concocted. He could see her pulse flickering in her throat. I haven't, she finally whispered. It was all the urging Ian needed to pull her head down to his, capturing her lips, claiming her mouth with his own. The faint whimper escaping from her throat caused a scarlet haze. The faint whimper escaping from her throat caused a scarlet haze to burst behind his eyes and surge throughout his body. His grip must have been nearly painful on her waist and the back of her neck, but she only clutched him closer. Both of them were panting when he finally broke the kiss. If I ever do something you do not desire, he forced out the words through lips which seemed to have lost the power of speech. If ever there is something you do not wish, you need only tell me and I will listen. Say a word and I will stop. She gazed down at him, her pupils so dilated they nearly engulfed the color of the irises. You can't ever do something I don't wish you to do. Her voice was slightly tremulous, but clear and honest. Good, Ian growled, because I've thought of little else beyond this. He squeezed her against him. In days. He craned his neck to capture her lips once again, a low moan eked unbidden from his chest when she met him with equal fervor. Her palms slid up the curve of his chest to grip his shoulders, what he wouldn't give to have her straddling him, his straining cock nestled in the sweet heat at the crux of her thighs. But Ian's lust-hazed mind still knew there had to be a line he did not cross. They must not do anything irrevocable, no matter how they might crave it. The onus was on him as the more experienced of them to maintain restraint and a reasonable hold upon his sanity, though Lord knew it would be one of the most difficult ventures of his life. He was ravenous for this woman. Their lips met in a frenzy. The click of teeth and breathless sighs filled the air of their little golden lit bubble. It was easy to believe the rest of the world outside of this intimate space had melted away, evaporated with the heat of whatever it was that had burned so brightly between them from their very first. Having Juliet in his arms felt right, even though every fiber of his being screamed that it was so wrong, so dangerous, in more ways than one. She pressed herself more closely to him, unconsciously rocking her hips against him in an instinctive rhythm. Ian's breath hissed through his teeth. Even if Juliet was untried and innocent, there remained, buried deep within her, primal urges. The femininity in her body knew the masculinity in his. It knew what to do, knew what it craved as naturally as how to keep her heart beating and her breath moving in and out of her lungs. Tell me what you want, he growled against her mouth. She whimpered in response, shaking her head, unable to voice what she desired. This, he demanded, his large palms cupping the perfectly rounded globes of her bottom in a bruising grip. You want my hands on you? His voice was growing harsher, the Scottish burr coming through more thickly with each second of the delectable torture of having Juliet in his arms, but not naked beneath him. What are your plans with me? This, Juliet hissed, her fingers twining through his hair almost painfully, her teeth scraping his lower lip. More of this. Ian growled, happy, nay, eager to oblige. He shoved his half-eaten supper across the table to create just enough space for what he intended. Rocking his weight forward, he stood enough to slide Juliet's bottom on the tabletop and propped her there. He pressed closer, nestling himself between her legs, standing over her, dominating her with his size, never breaking contact with his lips and tongue. She had to angle her head back to accommodate his height. Her hands, no longer able to reach his head, slipped down to his waistcoat to fist in the fitted silk. She was likely to leave wrinkles, but Ian didn't care one whit. In fact, he knew he'd smile finely upon those creases later when he saw them and recalled this interlude. Juliet's head fell back on a sigh when his lips trailed down her jaw. There are more places a man can kiss a woman to give her pleasure. Oh, she sighed somewhat belatedly. I, Ian breathed harshly. Here, he pressed his open mouth to the spot where her jaw met her neck. Here, he nipped her earlobe and then soothed it with a kiss. Here, he tasted the pounding pulse in her throat. Here, he kissed the milky expanse of her décolletage exposed above the edge of her gown. He was enveloped in her intoxicating scent, what he wouldn't give to bury his face just there. He teetered on a dangerous precipice of his self-control. He was mere inches away from all loss of sanity. He'd thought of little else but this woman in his arms. Knowing her mind had been similarly tortured was heady. It drove him wild. It awoke something barbaric and untamed within him. It roared to life within him like a blistering mountain wind through heather. It made him tighten his grip on Juliet's body, tangle his fingers in her hair, and yank her mouth to his once more to plunder her with his tongue. It bellowed at him to tear off her clothes and devour her. The last thought was like a bucket of icy water over his head, and Ian wrenched himself away from Juliet as if he'd been scorched. His chest heaved in time with the rise and fall of Juliet's delectable bosom. He had to be the one in charge of drawing a line in this wildly absurd situation. The onus was on him to maintain restraint. It might kill him, but he knew what he must do. Juliet's heavily lidded eyes met his. He knew his pupils were likely as ravenous as hers. Ian removed his shaking hand from her rear and tucked a loose black curl of hair behind her ear. Those mesmerizing eyes of hers slid close, and she tilted her head into his touch. It took everything he had not to send his senses to hell and take her right then and there. I fear we may have underestimated our chemistry. Ian's chuckle was as weak as his voice. Might I suggest we part ways for the evening? He cut off her mule of protest by gently pressing his thumb to her lips. He couldn't resist tracing the plump pillow of her lower lip with the pad of his thumb. It was a mistake, however, because he was nearly undone all over again when those lips parted, gifting him with a little glimpse of her pearly teeth and carnation pink tongue. He cleared his throat, but his voice was still noticeably husky. This is not to say you haven't considered everything and the implications therein, but I think we would be wise to keep our wits about us, and you must think on what exactly you hope to get out of this rather dangerous plan of yours. Dangerous? She laughed incredulously. She wouldn't ask that if she knew exactly where his mind went. Ian didn't dignify the question with a straightforward response. He was too afraid he would describe in vivid detail all the things he wanted to do to her. Now that this is out of our system, I need you to think clearly about what you want. What I want, she leaned back a little, her shapely brows knitting together. I told you what I want. I know what you desire, he said, cutting her off, doing everything in his power not to grind upwards and make his meaning blatant. What do you want? Where should the line be drawn? Because you and I both know there is no permanence here. Ian knew he needed to get away from Juliet before any more of his faculties fled him, before he did anything both of them would regret. It's important that you are certain about what you want to happen between us. The last thing I want is for this to end poorly, for you to regret anything. She opened her mouth to speak, but closed her lips once more, seeming to think better of what she'd been about to say. The last thing I want is for you to be hurt. And you? She whispered. What about you? Me? Ian barely stifled an incredulous chuckle. You have feelings as well, do you not? She clarified with a charmingly innocent tilt of her head. Lord, if only she knew how many feelings he had. The realization that she was concerned about him in this situation was sobering and heady at the same time. It both thrilled him and made him nervous. You need not worry about me. His voice was husky, rich, with everything pounding through his veins.
Ooh, wow.
I'd say there was spice, a little bit,
Oh,
a little
yeah.
taste of it.
For sure. I want to know what got them there and I want to know where they're going. So, all
There you go.
right. Well, I have a lot of questions for you, but first, we're going to take a quick break for our sponsors. The Historical Romance Sampler Podcast is a proud affiliate of Libro.fm. Libro.fm is a really cool audiobook retailer that offers the same selection of audiobooks at the same price that you would find at that other really big audiobook retailer. But instead of sending your money to a giant monopoly, your money with your purchase of Libro.fm audiobooks goes back to the local bookstore of your choice. That way you can purchase audiobooks, but still support your local literary community. Also cool is their Kiss Club, which features romance audiobooks on sale every month. If you're ready to sign up for Libro.fm, I've got a good deal for you. Using the code HISTORICAL, as in Historical Romance Sampler, sign up for a new membership and get 3 audiobooks for the price of 1. Check out the link in my show notes if you want more information. And now, back to the episode. I am back with Kelsey Swanson, who just read a very steamy scene from A Most Unsuitable Lover. And there are several interesting things I noticed from that scene. First of all, consent is sexy, and there is a lot of that going on. There was a moment specifically where Ian, throughout the whole scene, Ian is struggling with the fact that he's feeling lust. And then he has this sense of something else propriety that he should be following. And then there was a certain moment where his lust kind of became a third entity and it like kind of departed him and was directing himself, like he was completely disassociated from his lust. Mm-hmm. I'm curious how much of that is a theme that you wanted to explore, or did that just kind of show up in this?
It kind of was a bit of, I think, a personification of the belief and the stereotype that Scots were heathens. And he is Scottish. So I play off a lot of the prejudices back then and how he kind of struggles because he's not of the upper class, but he's kind of a gentleman because he's a doctor, but he's a Scottish doctor. So he's respected, but, he's kind of dangerous and he's pursued by a lot of, the upper class women who want a little taste of danger. So I was kind of playing off of that he really does kind of have this untamedness of inside of him. He's born in the Highlands and he's used to being free and open, and then he kind of had to lock himself away to fit into this societal mold in order to become the renowned physician that he is in London. So I kind of played off of that there is this untamed part of him, but it's beautiful and it's not savage in a bad way. It's savage in a good way.
Right. And how did you go about discovering those stereotypes and then, finding ways to break through them? Like, what was your research process like?
So, like you mentioned, my degrees are in English and history. I focused a lot on European history and British history. The history between Scotland and England is very interesting. The wars, the clan wars, the division inside Scotland with England, and then amongst themselves, and then the fact that Scotch Gaelic was outlawed and bagpipes were outlawed and their traditions were outlawed. They basically wanted to do everything to quash all things Scottish, and kind of bringing that in, that this perseverant undercurrent and how strong the Scottish people are. I kind of wanted Ian to personify that he's playing the part that the English want him to, but he still speaks Scotch Gaelic. He teaches Juliet that language because she's fascinated with languages and it's not something that she's ever heard before. And he opens her eyes to the beauty of Scotland and things like that. So I wanted to kind of bring that history that I had read about as much as I could and kind of not water it down, but make it into more concise points and form them into Ian, who is a personification of that perseverance. So
yeah, that's really interesting. I often think about Ireland and Scotland being kind of proving grounds where the British figured out how to other and subjugate the
Mm-hmm.
other. And I think in fiction, it is helpful for us to revisit that because there are so many experiences of people being othered and people doing the othering that continue. It's throughout history and it continues today.
Mm-hmm.
And having that as an entry point allows us to have a lot more empathy and kind of understand how it works.
Yes, absolutely. I absolutely agree. I wanted them to feel, like you said, the empathy that these are still people, even though they're othered. He still has desires. He still has traditions, even though it's dangerous to hold them. They're still there, and I think that that's the power of the soul and the will that I find fascinating.
Yeah. The other thing about that scene that stuck out to me is how character driven it is. It's very much about Ian's struggle to with himself about what he wants to do. Do you get hooked into your stories? Like what comes first? The characters, the plot, dialogue, trope, scenes?
Uh, Definitely characters and plot go hand in hand. I have been told many times I'm very character driven. I like to play around with tropes and twist them a little bit. Like my first book, it's a brother's best friend love story, but they've already always loved each other. They just have never said anything. So it's not quite, like, oh, he's pining and she just doesn't see him, or vice versa. I kind of twist them a little bit. I like damaged characters, so I like building plots off of characters who have complicated histories and backstories, and then it just kind of explodes from there. I have journals full of books. I think I have about 40 books plotted out.
Oh my
So
gosh.
yeah, it's been over a few years. It's not like I did this in a week. But it's I come up with these characters, and then very closely I formulate the plot given their particular backstories. So like I said, I love damaged characters, so more damage the better. And I think they make great plots, and then they just I just let it happen. I guess the stories just kind
Yeah.
of happen.
Yeah. That's interesting. And you mentioned in your bio that you do a lot of sketching, crocheting, and cooking, which are all
Yeah.
other forms of creativity. So, how do you think of your creativity? Is it all one, or do you have these different zones, and how do they interact with each other?
I think it's all one. It's just all different types of outlets for myself. So like in my bio, I had a childhood where I was very limited. I had a heart condition. I needed open heart surgery and everything. So at 8, 9, 10, I wasn't allowed to do gym class or play on the playground. All I could do was read. And I escaped that way. And then gradually that formed into my own writing and poetry. And then my grandmother crochets, so she taught me crochet. So it's all these little bits and pieces of people and moments that I love that I've kind of made this part of my personality. And I've just, even though now I'm healthy again, it has just kind of stayed a part of my personality. And it's all different outlets like crocheting, working with my hands, drawing and sketching and writing.
Yeah.
So it's all just kind of been a creative outlet in various ways.
Yeah. And do you feel, are you aware of any of that sense of limitation or, the fears that you must have been experiencing, that whole scary experience? Do you see that showing up in your writing at all?
Actually, this particular book, Juliet had scarlet fever as a child. And so she was very frail, and her twin brother became very reactionary. She's not even allowed to dance because he's worried she's going to collapse, even though she's well, he's her twin, so he's afraid of losing her. So he's become very reactionary in limiting what she can and can't do in her life. So this foray with Ian is her escape, her one and only chance that she feels that she can have fun. And I think that this really was delving deep into my own childhood of illness, and then everyone worried you're going to shatter, and then
Mhm.
realizing that you're okay and that you're allowed to finally pursue things that you love. So
Yeah.
so this particular book, it's definitely a piece from my childhood.
Was that easy to write or was it harder because it was so personal?
I think it was cathartic. It was nice to have a character that healed like that physically. And I mean, obviously, I couldn't have given her the exact same situation, and with open heart surgery and medicine was very different. But giving her something that could have killed her and weakened her for a significant amount of time after the fact felt very close to home. And it gave me a way to kind of present my childhood with a lens. So I was a little bit removed from it, but it was still cathartic. So it was difficult, but it felt good to write about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So showing someone who persevered, it was nice.
Yeah. It's great that you were able to take the space to write that. And I bet that it turns into a very rewarding read for us readers since it's so close to home
Thank
for
you.
you. Well, it is time to move into our fun segment, Love It or Leave It, where we find out how much of a rule breaker you are. All right, Love It or Leave It. Protagonists meet in the first 10% of the book.
I love it. I prefer that. I may not always write it, but I prefer it as a reader.
Love It or Leave It. Dual point of view narration.
Love it. I can't write any romance that's not that, but I can read it occasionally, but I love it.
There's always something missing.
Yeah.
All right. Love It or Leave It. Third person past tense.
Love it. That's the way I write.
Love It or Leave It. Third act breakup or dark moment.
Love it. I try not to do like the people call it the cliche third act breakup, but I always tend to do something like that. And I love me a dark story. So
Yes. I think in angsty stories, there's going to be at least
yes,
one breakup, if not more.
exactly. I love some dark and angst and twisty plots, and it's just fun. I feel like a
Yeah.
little puppet master.
Love It or Leave It. Always end with an epilogue.
I love it. I personally write epilogues in my books. I love reading epilogues. I love seeing where characters end up. And I've even written some bonus epilogues for some of my books where you see them 15 years down the line. So it's kind of nice to, I think it's nice to get that glimpse because you want to believe that their happily ever after goes on forever. And it's nice to see that, I think.
Yeah. Love It or Leave It. Share research in your author's note.
I love it. That's my college student soul. So if I do an extensive amount of research, I will provide sources or references or a little bit more history and background. And I like that because then I mean, I've heard a lot of people don't actually read them, but I read them. So I figure I may as
Yeah.
well include it, especially, I mean, I put the effort in. Other authors put the effort in. You might as well share your research because you never know, someone out there may really want to read more on it. So I think it's great.
Yeah. Well, are there any other romance rules I didn't ask about that you break?
I think, like I said, I kind of play off of tropes a little bit. So I have, like I said, in my first book, it's brother's best friend or best friend's little sister, but it's like this unrequited love where neither thinks they're good enough for the other one. And so I take it a little step further where it's not just they have a crush on each other. Well, it's a little more complicated than that. And then my second book is enemies to lovers in forced proximity, but we have George, who's the main male character, and he's severely physically wounded. And he's kind of having to rediscover himself and realizing how much of his pain is internal in order to come to terms with that. And then he can move on. Book three, I have a neurodivergent male main character, which was fascinating to research and write. And it's been one of my best received books. And this one is a class difference, but it's a Scottish physician and an Earl's sister who she's very sheltered, but it's because of illness, not just because, oh, she's a lady and it's proper. And it's so I've kind of like, I like to play off of common tropes and make them a little bit less expected. So I enjoy that tremendously.
Yeah, that's awesome. It sounds like you add a layer or two to really make
Yeah,
it
I try.
angsty.
Yes, the angst.
Well, this has been fantastic. Thanks so much, Kelsey.
Thank you for having me. I had a great time.
Where can our listeners find you and your books?
All of them are on Amazon. They are so A Most Unsuitable Lover comes out September 3rd. And all my other books are also available on Amazon. They're available as paperback, ebook, and also through Kindle Unlimited. So if you have a subscription, you can read for free. And then I also have a novella coming out in October 2nd. I'm part of the Curves and Cravats anthology with 11 other authors. We have written little novellas, all based on curvy heroines. And yeah, I love it. It's wonderful. And the covers are gorgeous. They start actually coming out August 14th. And the one book will be released every week. Mine comes out October 2nd. And that one's fun too. I played with a mistaken identity in that one. And
Ooh,
it's a lot of fun.
nice.
So yeah, that will also be on Amazon and Kindle Unlimited and everything.
Great. And I will drop a link to your website in the show notes for anyone to find out more.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you again for coming on the show. This has been really fun.
It's been wonderful. Thank you for having me.
That's it for this week. Check out the show notes where I put links for my guests, myself, and the podcast. Until next week, happy reading.